Dr. Elias Vance's kingdom was built on certainty. It was an empire of the mind, housed on the 45th floor of the Sterling Tower in Midtown Manhattan. His office, a sanctuary of polished mahogany and glass, offered a dizzying, contemptuous view of Central Park, a sprawling patch of wildness neatly contained by the city grid, much like the messy human psyche contained by Elias's cognitive behavioral therapy (CBT) frameworks. At 55, Elias was the intellectual darling of his generation. His books, like The Optimized Mind and The Logic of Joy, sold in the millions. His weekly podcast was required listening in executive boardrooms. He was the media's go-to expert for rationalizing the irrational, a soothing voice that promised a world where every emotional challenge could be systematically dismantled and solved. Yet, as the man who taught the world to live mindfully, Elias was perpetually running on empty. The tyranny of the timer. His professional life was a relentless cascade of 45-minute sessions, each one a high-stakes performance. He consumed his clients' anxieties, their fears of market collapse, their shame over failed marriages, their existential dread, and processed them through his brilliant, hyper-efficient intellect. He dispensed surgical diagnoses and tailored action plans, receiving praise and seven-figure consulting fees in return. But the moment a client left, Elias was gripped by a suffocating silence, only to be filled immediately by the clamor of his own internal critique. Was that tone condescending? Should I have introduced the thought record homework sooner? Am I brilliant or merely a sophisticated echo chamber? His personal life had been streamlined to maximize output. Dinner was a scientifically balanced meal eaten while reading research abstracts. Sleep was a non-negotiable 9 hours, perpetually threatened by the buzzing phone or the internal mental planning for the next day's 11 appointments. He had optimized his environment to be calm, but his inner world was a supercomputer running at redline, generating only heat and anxiety. His wife, Clara, a highly regarded curator, had left him 3 years prior. Her parting words, delivered with a gentle sadness he had yet to fully process, still echoed in the quiet corners of his office. "You've cured everyone's anxiety, Elias, except your own. And you haven't been here with me in years. You're always 3 appointments ahead or 5 years in the future." He had tried to analyze the statement, breaking it down into catastrophizing and all-or-nothing thinking, but even his own theories failed to contain the simple, brutal truth. He was absent. The cracks in the system. The great philosophical shift began, not with a breakdown, but with a tiny object, a cheap, plastic-encased sand timer on his desk. He used it to keep his sessions precisely to 45 minutes. One Tuesday afternoon, as the last grains of sand slipped through the neck, marking the end of a session with a powerful, emotionally wrecked CEO, Elias felt a strange, profound exhaustion. He had just guided the man through a devastating divorce, teaching him to anchor his focus on verifiable facts, not hypothetical fears. Yet, as the man thanked him, radiating a manufactured sense of control, Elias noticed the ceiling light reflecting in the last grains of sand. He hadn't heard the CEO's suffering. He had only heard the problem statement and deployed the solution set. He had been a flawless machine, but machines don't feel. He suddenly remembered a conversation from 20 years ago with his philosophy professor, Dr. Anya Sharma. "We are not minds in bodies, Elias. We are experiences. And an experience lived only through critical analysis is an experience halved." The memory was a stinging rebuke. He, the master of being present, couldn't recall the smell of the rain that morning or the taste of his breakfast. His hyper-awareness was aimed only at efficiency and self-critique, not at life itself. That evening, he was scheduled for a television debate on the prevalence of anxiety in the digital age. As he sat in the green room, the makeup artist powdering his distinguished brow, he saw a video monitor displaying a weather report. A low-pressure system was moving into the Appalachians, a vast, indifferent force of nature. His heart, which usually responded to stress with rapid, controlled beats, felt a sudden, inexplicable pull towards that wilderness. He saw not a system to analyze, but an escape hatch. He went on air and gave his usual brilliant performance, articulate, logical, compelling. He spoke of the need to identify the triggers and manage the narrative. He was a fraud. He was selling the logic of peace while living the reality of chaos. The great unloading, the decision came swiftly, ruthlessly. He was tired of being Elias Vance, the brand. He wanted to be Elias Vance, the man whoever that was. He made a series of shocking, uncharacteristic moves. He sent a brief email to his literary agent. All public engagements and writing projects are indefinitely suspended. Do not contact me. He transferred his practice entirely to his protégé, a competent but less cynical woman named Dr. Lena Harmon. He liquidated a small portion of his assets, bought a vintage Land Rover, and, most importantly, found a tiny, rustic cabin for sale in an obscure valley in the Great Smokies. The listing explicitly stated, no cell service, no Wi-Fi. When he told Lena, she was aghast. Elias, your wait list is 6 months long. You're throwing away a legacy. Why? Are you ill? I am ill with over-analysis, Lena, he replied, already packing a box of old vinyl records instead of research papers. I'm retiring the analytical mind for a while and giving the aware mind a chance to speak. The drive was cathartic. For the first time in 2 decades, he didn't follow a GPS. He used a tattered paper map, navigating by landmarks, forcing his focus away from the screen and onto the physical reality of the road. As the skyscrapers melted into rolling hills and the asphalt turned to gravel, the internal roar of his thoughts began to recede, replaced by the wind and the crunch of tires. When he arrived at the cabin, it was late afternoon. It was tiny, built from dark, raw timber, surrounded by an unruly garden and dense, towering trees. The air smelled of damp earth and pine needles. The quiet was absolute, a deafening, terrifying silence. The battle with the ghost of Elias. The first few weeks were not peaceful. They were a battle. The machine mind, deprived of external problems, clients, contracts, media, turned its full, scorching attention inward. The absence of noise became an invitation for internal demons. You are irrelevant now. You are a coward who couldn't handle the pressure. This is an intellectual retreat, not a real solution. You are avoiding your life. He tried to meditate, using the exact techniques he had taught thousands. But the moment he closed his eyes, the mind went into high-speed commentary. That breath was shallow. You're trying too hard. You are failing at meditation now, too. Elias was learning the difference between managed control and unburdened awareness. In the city, he could manage his thoughts because they were focused on external targets. Here, without a target, the machine spun wildly, threatening to consume him. One damp, rainy afternoon, in sheer frustration, he decided to clear the overgrowth in the tiny yard. He spent hours hacking at briars and pulling stubborn weeds. His hands blistered, his back ached, and his mind, completely occupied by the simple, immediate task of pulling, finally fell silent. There was no time to analyze the past or fear the future. There was only the resistance of the root and the pain in his muscles. He stopped, muddy and sweating, and noticed a small purple wildflower pushing up through the disturbed earth. He stared at it, not analyzing its botanical makeup or its symbolic meaning, but simply seeing its tiny, brave reality. A profound, simple truth landed in his consciousness, entirely unbidden by any intellectual effort. The mind is not a generator of thought. It is an observer of reality. When the observer is fully engaged with the present, the thought generator simply has no bandwidth to operate. This was the core of mindfulness, stripped bare of all the marketable packaging. The transformation into Silas Elias began to live the lesson, slowly, painfully, consistently. He adopted the name Silas, a personal ritual to shed the Vance brand. When he made his morning coffee, he didn't plan his day. He focused only on the gurgle of the water, the texture of the ceramic mug, the rising aroma. When he walked, he dedicated his awareness to the feeling of the rough earth beneath his heavy boots. He learned to distinguish between thoughts that were useful, for example, "I need firewood," and thoughts that were parasitic, for example, "I should have taken that TV deal." He gave the latter no fuel. He started visiting the tiny town nearby and, finding the old library poorly stocked, opened a small, unassuming bookstore in a dusty, sun-filled room. He curated not bestsellers but old classics, philosophy, and poetry books that invited contemplation, not consumption. He was no longer selling solutions. He was facilitating questions. His reputation, filtered through the slow-moving local gossip, changed. He wasn't the famous Dr. Vance who had failed. He was Silas, the quiet, kind man who read poetry and had a peculiar, unwavering stillness in his eyes. People began to seek him out, not because of his credentials, but because of his presence. One day, an anxious young man from the city, a tech worker named Marco, full of the same manic energy Elias had once embodied, traveled for days to find him. Marco poured out his anxiety, his mind a torrent of uncontrollable worry. Silas listened, not with the clinical efficiency of Elias Vance, but with the boundless patience of the mountain itself. He understood this boy's suffering completely. It was the echo of his own younger self. He knew a lecture on cognitive distortions would be useless. The boy didn't need a framework. He needed an experience of stillness. Silas took Marco to the birdbath in his garden and handed him the impossibly full glass of water. "Walk," Silas commanded. "Do not spill a drop." As Marco returned, sweating, triumphant and silent, Silas saw the profound realization dawning in the young man's eyes. It was the same simple truth that had saved Silas himself, the realization that when the entire being is devoted to the now, the machine of worry simply shuts down, not through force, but through absorption. Silas didn't need to explain CBT or mindfulness or psychological principles. He had facilitated a moment of pure being. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the ancient, quiet peaks, Silas sat alone on his porch. He felt the familiar, gentle pulse of his own awareness, not a frantic race, but a steady, deep rhythm. He was no longer Elias Vance, the famous doctor whose job was to fix the broken minds of the city. He was Silas, a man who had chosen solitude over fame, presence over prestige, and had finally unburdened his brilliant, beautiful mind from the tyranny of its own analysis. His life was simpler, slower, richer. He was home,